Welcome to the One Mind Dharma podcast. My name is Matthew Sokolov, and to learn more about us, you can visit oneminddharma.com. For individual sessions, oneminddharma.com/coach. And visit us on social media at One Mind Dharma. YouTube, Instagram. I'm on TikTok now because I'm hip at the Mindful Counselor. So I'm doing today's podcast with no notes. Usually when I record a Dharma talk or a podcast or give a Dharma talk, I have, my notes, my scribbled and jotted thoughts and ideas and quotes and what I want to talk about. But today I don't have that. I'm going off the cuff. And I'm going to answer a question that I received a couple times recently. I had two students I'm meeting with who asked me this, and then two people that emailed me like 6 weeks ago now. Charlie and Jimena separately. I heard your question. I told you I would answer it on a podcast. And now we're finally here. And that is about actually starting a meditation practice. My wife Elizabeth, told me one time years ago, why do you introduce the topic like that? Like they don't know from the title. Like they see the title of the episode, they know what it is. You don't need the suspense. And I think about that every time I do it and introduce it like that, but I do it anyways. So how do we actually start a meditation practice? And some of the people that have asked me this question have what I would call a deep understanding of the Dharma, right? Like they're listening to Dharma talks. Maybe they're listening to more kind of secular stuff like Eckhart Tolle. I'm not sure how to pronounce his last name. Or maybe they've been introduced to like an MBSR class. Maybe some of them are listening to monastics and serious Dharma. And someone that asked me had no practice or they kind of, they were introduced to mindfulness through something else and they liked it, but they don't really know how to start meditating on their own. So all of that to say, it doesn't matter where you are on the path or your understanding or anything like that. Starting a practice can be hard or difficult or daunting. And that's okay. We'll talk about that in a moment. But before talking about starting a practice, I want to actually talk about what we should do before starting a practice. In many Buddhist traditions in Asia, and many teachers, I know Mahasi Sayadaw and Sayadaw U Pandita, so many Burmese and Thai teachers talk extensively about working on sila or ethics before we actually develop a meditation practice, of building merit. I believe in many countries like Thailand or Burma, Myanmar, that many practitioners actually work on generating merit, on practicing ethics, long before they really dive into the meditative practices. And the reason for this is rather simple and straightforward. It's easier to meditate when our ethics are better. There's a Jack Kornfield quote. Again, I have no notes, so I'm going to guess at what he said. That he says it's really hard to meditate after a day of stealing and murdering. And I've had this experience. I've caused harm in my life that years later I'm meditating. I had a period during when I lived in Los Angeles, so maybe 10 or 11 years ago now, where every time I sat to meditate, I was dealing with some very real guilt. I had caused an immense amount of harm to some people around me in a way that um, perhaps really caused some trauma or altered their life. Every time I went to sit, it would come up. It was kind of undealt with. And I dealt with that or am still dealing with it, but worked with a therapist and other things. Therapy, and I was active in 12-step and refuge recovery at the time. But it was a real experience of how ethics can impact meditation. So my encouragement, just before you even start actually trying to sit and practice, is to look at your ethics, is to look at these kind of factors of how you're behaving and how you're acting in the real world. My experience personally is that it's easier to meditate when we're behaving in a more wholesome way, causing less harm. And I say that my experience both as a practitioner and a teacher. I've seen it with people I work with, right? Like I do individual sessions is what I've been doing for since we left the United States and shut down the meditation center. And I work with people who are still causing a lot of harm. Maybe they're struggling with an addiction or some behaviors that cause harm to a loved one, and they're practicing. And my experience has absolutely been that practice is more fruitful when our ethics are in line. So that's not to say you can't start practicing until you're behaving perfectly, but as you consider starting to practice and building a meditation practice, don't leave out this piece of working on your ethics, on how you behave in the world. When we go to start a practice, I was just having a conversation with an old friend, um, like a brother. Like the closest thing I've ever had to a brother is my best man at my wedding. Just a super good friend, and he's been struggling recently with just some anxiety, to be as vague as possible, and not out him or anything. But like he's been struggling with some anxiety, I'll call it, and that's maybe oversimplifying it. But for the sake of this story, anxiety. And he had said to me, I often don't tell people. I mean, I rarely tell people you should meditate because I don't really listen when people do that to me. I don't want to be that person. But he said, I've been really wanting to meditate, but every time I go to meditate, my brain just goes. Exactly what I described earlier when I was younger, right? Just that monkey mind. And we had a lovely conversation that I've had so many times with people about, of course it does. There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with you. If you could sit and close your eyes and just concentrate and drop into the moment, you wouldn't need meditation. Meditation is a training. It's not a competition. If it were a competition where like who can concentrate the most or the fastest, sure, you might be not in, but that's not what meditation is meant for or what the purpose of it is, right? The purpose is it's a training. I've heard it described so many times like it's like building a muscle at the gym. The first time you go to the gym, you don't lift up the heaviest weight and go, oh, I can't lift that, I'm not going to the gym. You start with the lighter weights, you build up these muscles, you build up this ability, this endurance. You might perfect things or work to improve things outside of the gym, like the way you eat or how much sleep you get or what time you go to the gym. Much like you do with meditation, right? The things we eat or consume or the way we behave or how much sleep we get or when we try to meditate impacts us. And we kind of build this mental muscle over time. This is kind of perhaps a overgeneralization, but having monkey mind and bouncing thoughts is not a reason to not meditate. I actually think it's a reason to meditate. So give yourself a little bit of, offer yourself a little bit of patience, a little bit of loving kindness or metta, a little bit of understanding. I think we can kind of shift that story from, oh, I have such bad monkey mind or anxiety, and shift it into, oh, meditation, I'm working on this. And I don't want to downplay or dismiss someone's experience of monkey mind or anxiety or any kind of anxiety related mental health disorders, because they are suffering. It's brutal, but it's not a reason necessarily to not meditate. So when you do start a practice, remember this, that it's like training the mind, training the mental muscle. Maybe we're training it in mindfulness, or training the mind and heart in loving kindness, but they're trainings. As far as starting a practice goes, my best advice is to just go for it. Just do it. There's a few things that I think are really kind of worth knowing or recognizing. And one is that if we're looking to build a new habit, doing it at the same time every day is generally much more effective. Like building a routine or some structure or schedule around it is generally more effective than doing it whenever we can. It's also, research suggests it's easier to build new habits in the morning than in the afternoon or evening. So if you can and you're able, find some time to meditate in the morning. Find some time to incorporate it into your schedule. So I've shared this before, that I used to wake up and meditate before I had my coffee. I think I was even smoking back then, and before I even had my first cigarette, I would wake up and meditate. Now I have 2 young kids and 2 dogs and 2 cats, and I wake up and have to handle a couple things first, and then I meditate. I let the dogs out, I feed them, I meditate. So see if you can set a regular time to do that. And if you can't, because sometimes that's not accessible for us, meditate when you can. You're not like completely out of luck if you can't make it a regular time or can't do it in the morning. When I was working in the treatment industry years ago, I had like weird shifts and was doing overnight shifts, and I just meditated whenever I could. Not whenever I could. I didn't use every free moment to meditate. But if the time I could meditate was when I got off work at 10 p.m., that was when I meditated. If the time I could meditate was when I got off work at 6 a.m., that was when I meditated. So just do it. My other suggestion, and I'm going to have a few, is start short. I remember going to Spirit Rock when I was 14 or 15, and it was like a family day or teen day or something like that, and my dad brought me, and we arrived, and like right off the bat was a 30-minute meditation, and it was very, very difficult / I would question whether or not I was even meditating for most of it. So don't do that to yourself. You don't need to start with 30. Again, going back to the weights, you don't need to start with 30 minutes. I personally think that longer periods of meditation are incredibly beneficial. As we can kind of build up the muscle, there's kind of humps that I find myself getting over, and my students find themselves getting over, that after it takes 5 minutes maybe to settle. After 10 or 15 minutes, I really kind of drop into concentration. After 25, 30 minutes, I begin getting a little bit bored or restless in the mind and body. So that's a whole new thing to work with. So I do think there's benefit to longer periods of meditation, but we don't necessarily get the benefits of those longer periods until we're ready. If you just lift up that super heavy weight and try to deadlift it your first day at the gym, you're going to pull a hammy. And if you sit for 45 minutes for the first time without meditating, there's a chance you're going to have a very unpleasant experience and kind of get turned off from meditation. So instead, stick with short little meditations. There's tons of 5-minute guided meditations out there, even shorter than that. 5 to 10 minutes, I think, is a great place to start. When I first started working the program of refuge recovery with with a teacher at Against the Stream, Enrique, he had me start with taking 3 deep breaths 3 times a day. So he was like, set a timer or an alarm or alert reminder. That was the word I was looking for. Set a reminder and see if when it goes off, you can just take 3 deep breaths. That's it. And just kind of as a super accessible way to begin practicing mindfulness. What I found was often when that alarm or reminder went off, I would take those 3 breaths and kind of continue. Maybe I took 5 or 10 or 20 because I found it a little bit pleasant. But the suggestion here is to start small. Don't overwhelm yourself. My next suggestion is use guided meditations. I feel like so many people that I talk to look down on guided meditations, I would say. And I'm definitely like putting words into people's mouths there, but my perception or my experience of it is, and I've gone through this period myself, is that guided meditations are for beginners and you can't get real meditation without complete silence. I've been practicing for all these years and I just listened to a guided meditation a couple days ago because it popped up on one of my podcast feeds and I thought, oh, that sounds good. Like what I need. It was a Sharon Salzberg meditation. That's kind of calling to me today, and I did it. Listen to guided meditations. Get a feeling for the structure of a meditation, the dropping in, the kind of meat of it, and the kind of not dropping out, rising out of it in a sense. Get a feeling for the practices. It's one thing to, we can read about how to do a certain meditation and then try to take it into meditation practice, for sure. But sometimes the guidance helps us come back to the present moment, kind of reminds us when the mind wanders off, and gives us a little bit more structure so we don't have to think about what we should be doing. Someone's telling us. So my suggestions thus far, this is really hard without notes. My suggestions thus far have been to find a time and place that's regular if you're able, to keep it short, to listen to guided meditations. I would also throw in there that when we first come to Dharma and Buddhist practice, there are so many different types of meditation, right? There's just looking at like the foundations of mindfulness and the first foundation, mindfulness of the body, there are so many different practices in there. And then we move into the other foundations of mindfulness. And there's all the heart practices. And there's the concentrative practices. And then there's the different ways we practice insight meditation, the kind of Vipassana way from Goenka. There's the Mahasi Sayadaw way. There's the more kind of traditional in the West, like insight meditation way. There's just so many different ways to meditate and different practices to try. My recommendation is to stick with one practice. And that's not to say we should only do concentration meditation forever. I'm not a believer in that. I think that the path is incomplete if we're only doing concentration meditation and we're not incorporating the heart practices. I think the practice is incomplete if we're only doing self-compassion and we're not practicing any mindfulness. So for sure, as time goes on and as we build our practice, it's important to incorporate these different parts of practice that feed one another and feed our well-being. But often what I see my students doing that are new to practice is they do a day of concentration, a day of metta or loving kindness, a day of equanimity practice, a day of Vedana or feeling tone practice. And that's cool. Like, I think that as we develop our practice, we can kind of practice in that manner. There's definitely, I think for me personally, there was a period where that was kind of how I practiced, was something different every day. And then more recently, my practice has mostly been just a mindfulness practice, starting with a few minutes of loving kindness. But when we first start meditating, in order to both understand the practice and the qualities we're working to develop and to actually see their development, it can be beneficial to stick with one thing. I can't say what that is for you. I barely know what it is for me in a given moment. If you want a suggestion, you're absolutely welcome to reach out to me at matthew@oneminddharma.com. Tell me a little bit about yourself. We can figure out maybe where to start. But whatever it is, and I'm just going to use concentration as an example. Maybe sit with concentration every day for a month. I don't know. I don't think there's necessarily a set time, but sit with the same practice for a while. Sit with concentration and really build this ability to concentrate, begin to see the benefits. It will give your practice energy and purpose and make you want to do it more. When we're hopping around, we may not really see the benefits and we may lose steam. So stick with one practice to start, especially when brand new. And then my last suggestion would be to find some support. And that doesn't have to be necessarily a teacher. I do offer one-on-one sessions, but this whole podcast is not just a lead up to me plugging myself. It doesn't necessarily have to be a teacher. I think a teacher is a great thing. I've had a teacher I work with for 13 years now. I've changed teachers, but I've always had a teacher I work with and see regularly. It could be a monastic, a monk or a nun. It could be some sangha, some community, a sitting group, just to bounce ideas off of or share experience or converse about the practice. Maybe it's like maybe it's an online community. And I don't think that I think a lot of the online communities with Dharma and meditation can be somewhat toxic. Like, I am on a bunch of subreddits about meditation, mindfulness, Buddhism. I used to be in a bunch of Facebook groups, but I'm not really on Facebook anymore. And there's a lot of great nuggets in there. And I've seen people ask questions and get advice that I personally find to be lovely advice. And I've seen people just be absolutely brutal, like they are on the internet, or even offer advice that is rather detrimental to one's practice. But I think we can use our discernment, right, to recognize those comments or things. So you might find support online. But yeah, find some support, whether it's a teacher, whether it's a sangha or community in person, a sitting group, or an online sitting group, a community online like a Facebook group or a Reddit subreddit. Find people with whom you can talk about your practice and your path and what you're going through and where you can learn from others. I will add one more thing. It's not up yet, depending on when you're listening to this, but we're working on a podcast for my partner Elizabeth's uh, private practice. She's a therapist with runs a private practice with a few other therapists, and we're launching a podcast, kind of looking at research of various. I don't want to say just mental health or cognitive topics, and I just wrote. I write the episodes and then we record them together. I just wrote an episode looking at the research on building habits. That's where all that information comes about, like easier to build habits in general in the morning. One of the things that really helps people build habits is like an accountability buddy or a habit buddy. So see if you can find someone else who doesn't know anything about meditation but is interested and wants to meditate with you. I just was on TikTok answering some comments and like messages that people had sent me with questions, and one of my old buddies, Anthony, had commented on. He comments on a lot of my posts, but he is one of the like first meditation buddies I ever had. I met him at Against the Stream probably 15 years ago. We hung out together all the time. We organized events for the Sangha together. We meditated together. So find like a Dharma buddy. Find someone to practice with. They're some of the most beautiful and long-lasting relationships I've ever had. And I think that as you get like a confidant, a trusted friend or a family member to talk about the practice with, it can really help give someone to bounce ideas off of, to learn from, to get new perspectives. Okay, so those are my thoughts. I apologize for taking so long to answer those questions. If you have a question that you want me to answer, either via email or you think it would make a good podcast episode, Matthew@oneminddharma.com. For individual sessions, you can visit oneminddharma.com/coach. Yeah, I'm here to support your practice in whatever way possible. And if you have any questions or you want some suggestions or even you want to just get something out and just kind of vent, I'm here.